annual meeting every summer. I want to welcome you all, and I'm so glad that you joined. I just would like to give a shout out that we have Lee Family Contacts, we have CLC coordinators, we have executive directors of family organizations, we have governance board members, and principal investigators who have registered, also advocates and youth engagement specialists. So welcome to all, and I'm glad you're all here. Looking forward to this with Trina Osher. And I'd like to introduce Trina. Trina is the president of Huff Osher Consulting Incorporated and is an expert on family engagement, a nationally recognized leader in the family movement for children's mental health, and the principal architect of the definition of family-driven care and the Ambassador's Guide to promote its dissemination and implementation. Having raised children who received mental health, substance abuse, juvenile justice, and special education services, she speaks and trains with an authentic family voice, working to build collaborative alliances between families, policymakers, and providers in all systems that serve children with challenging needs. She also collaborates with the research community on studies that will result in information that can improve the quality of life for these children and their families. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Trina Osher, and welcome.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you also to everyone who has joined this call. It's really a privilege to work with all of you who are so committed to family engagement. We have only an hour to go through this, so it's going to be rather fast-paced. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A box. There are TAP staff who are monitoring those questions and will be interrupting me if something comes up that really needs immediate answering. We'll attempt to answer any unanswered questions offline later. So if you want a response and you don't get one now, please make sure you identify yourself in some way so we can get back to you. Would you please go on to the first slide? Thank you. It's important that we understand what family engagement means. And there have been a number of work groups in various systems serving children that have focused on what this question is. And this term, this particular definition, all things that parents do to help their children develop, learn, and do well in school, at home, and in the community, is relatively universal. It has been highly used in other systems. Child welfare, education, especially consider this. And it applies certainly in systems of care since they're very community-based. The illustrations here are just examples. I'm sure many of you can think of lots of other things that families do. But it is not, family engagement is not only what families do in direct interaction with program staff, whether it's a system of care program or another kind of program. It's things that families do outside of those programs that also support the common shared goals that we have. Please go to the next slide. In order to support family engagement, these are things that staff from systems of care and other programs need to do. And this is based on research that has been very extensively documented. Karen Mapp is one of the best-known researchers in family engagement in the country. In fact, she's just been recently engaged by the Department of Education. Whoops, sorry, I dropped the phone for a second. Recently engaged by the Department of Education to head up a new family engagement initiative that they have. And the key, the most important thing that has come through all of the literature is that staff and parents have to share responsibility. I really emphasize this share word for regular two-way communication that's meaningful, not just one way, but two-way, where everybody, both sides, all sides, really feel that they are involved and can speak what they need to say in a safe way and also get a respectful and useful response back that is non-judgmental. This is both bidirectional. It's not a one-directional thing. Let's go on to the next one. People often ask me, so what really affects family engagement with systems of care? And it's not a simple, while the chart looks simple, it's not such a simple concept. On the vertical arrow, you see the word capacities. By that, I mean the things that are innate within an individual or have been learned by an individual. You might think of it as skills or abilities. I might have the capacity, for example, to speak French. That would be untrue. I don't speak French, but it's a possibility. If I studied it, I could learn it. It's not an innate capacity because it's not my original language. Another capacity might be someone has a natural leadership capacity. Another might be someone who's very good at positive discipline for children. You could come up with long, long lists of them depending on the perspective of the issue. But the capacities are the things that people are able to do. The conditions are the situations in which they can use those skills. So, for example, if I have the capacity to speak French, but I'm in a community that doesn't speak French, the conditions don't support the use of that skill. If I have the capacity to speak French and or if I'm in a community that speaks only French and I have that capacity, that enhances my ability to be effective as a communicator. Both the conditions and the capacities match. Now, families have capacities, and so do the systems of care. Now, quite honestly, systems don't have anything. They're just constructs. It's the people who work in the systems who have capacities. But there are policies and procedures and infrastructures that people create for their system of care that establish the conditions under which those individual staff can, in fact, use their capacities to the fullest or develop new capacities if they need them. When family capacities and personnel and system of care capacities are high and the conditions in which they are interacting are positive and strong, you get the best possible maximum amount of family engagement because everybody really is strong. But that, of course, is not reality. There are systems that are under development where the conditions are not fully in place yet, and so things are a little rough at the beginning, a little rough going. And so even when you've got staff or family who have strong capacities, the conditions might not be fully up, and so you have a lower level of success. And the same thing could be true the other way. You might have a very well-developed system, but you've got brand new staff, or you've had some turnover, or you've just recruited a new bunch of families, and they're not fully informed about the system. You're working with developing their own capacities. And so as these things start out that way, again, you might not have as high a level of engagement as you would like or as positive engagement results. But over time, you can build capacity and you can develop conditions so that this can increase. And this is the core about what it takes. It takes both conditions and capacities. It takes people and the infrastructure to make engagement strong. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Your paper handout, if you've printed it out, has a more readable version of this slide. Unfortunately, I learned too late that online presentations darken the backgrounds. So I hope you're able to read this here. And there is a reference on the bottom of the slide to a longer article that fully explores this chart. And this is just to give you a taste of what we're talking about when we make the paradigm shift from a provider-driven to a family-driven system of care. And the reason I've put this up is that if we're going to get to that shared responsibility for the communication, we have got to understand that we're moving away from a singularly provider-driven system to one that is more family-driven or more driven by the youth as well. And this is not to say we are totally replacing what we are a provider-driven system with a family-driven one. We are enhancing what's there. The provider-driven system isn't necessarily wrong or bad. It's what we have developed through professional training and research and system development over many years. But it is not sufficient to have the level of engagement of families that we're really looking for in systems of care. So, for example, in a provider-driven system, it's typically the professionals and the agencies where the solutions to issues are found. In a family-driven system, you have the professionals and agencies as part of the family support team. So you have the child and family and their support team being the source of the solutions. Similarly, in terms of the relationship and the historical, and I have to honestly say, I see this sort of gradually drifting away as training for professionals becomes more family-oriented and research is informing professional training more. But the child and family are in in a provider-driven system have been viewed as somewhat as a dependent client, and they're expected to carry out the instructions of the professional who is deemed an expert. In a family-driven system, that expertise is still valued, the expertise of the professional, but it is enhanced by including the family as a partner or a collaborator in the decision-making. The professional shares more information with the family, and the family is therefore better able to participate. I am not going to go through the rest of this chart. It really is a whole webinar unto itself to discuss this in detail and give lots of examples and talk about the challenges to accomplishing this. But I really wanted to put this up in front of you so you could see that this is a movement forward, not a total revolution. I'm going to go on to the next slide, please. Okay. Here are some examples of conditions and capacities that help to make this paradigm shift, that shift the gears, as it were. Things like information, communication, and training. If you've got high capacities and you've got infrastructure that supports it, and people have understanding that this is not simply communication within the professional workforce, but also includes families, then you've got it going. It's moving in the right direction. The same thing is true with individual behaviors and skills. You might have some old staff who have very traditional training, haven't had opportunities to upgrade their skills to be more contemporary with family-driven care, but they can learn those things, and so that moves on there. Other things are attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions, and these things apply, by the way, not just to professional staff, but to families as well. Families can have limited or high skills and so forth. Family attitudes and perceptions are just as important as staff attitudes and perceptions. If families are coming to the table with a lot of unpleasant history and they come with a skeptical or negative attitude because of their past, there has to be work to overcome that before you're really going to be able to shift the gears. Same thing is true with staff. If they come to the table with bad experiences and unsuccessful histories with families, the air has to get cleared and people have to be open to a new way of working. Organizational cultures and behaviors can support that or not, depending on how they're structured. And obviously, there are certain models and approaches that are more, promote more interaction and communication with families than others. So you want to make choices along those lines. And I see here that the outline around the last gear, which was funding, environments, and policies, doesn't seem to have shown up. I apologize for that. I think that, again, is probably a glitch of the technology here. But again, if you haven't got policies in place that support staff to take the time to get to know families and interact with them in a positive, shared decision-making way, then staff, even if they may have that value and may have those skills, are not going to be able to do it. They're going to not. It just isn't going to happen. So all of that has to come together. And then the reason for the question mark is that this is not a definitive list. These are some examples. And we'd like to ask all of you now to take a poll and let us know, you get to only choose one, which of these, on this slide anyway, are the conditions and capacities that are most well-developed in your program, in your systemic care program. You get to choose one, and we'll see how this comes out. So please vote. Well, it looks to me like the people who want to vote have voted. So I guess we can see here quickly that information, communication, and training seems to be the strongest for most of you. and that the weakest areas are organizational, cultural behaviors, and funding environments and policies. I would suggest you keep these in mind for your own community as you move forward. You might want to be thinking in terms of strategic planning around family engagement, which of the areas you want to use to help strengthen those areas that are the weakest. Could we move to the next poll, please? Great. Okay, now in this one, we want to ask you to switch your view and talk about, identify the conditions or capacities that most need development in your program. And they maybe we'll get a different picture here. While you're completing this poll, if any of you have additional conditions and capacities that you believe are important for engaging families in your system of care program, please type them into the Q&A box so that we can begin to capture and expand the knowledge base here, and this can become part of the discussion in the community of practice. Have you all decided? I don't see numbers going up anymore, so I'm going to assume that a number of you have chosen not to take this poll, which is fine. But it would seem here that attitudes and perceptions and beliefs, as well as the funding, environment, and policies are areas that need a lot of addressing. I would say as I travel around the country and talk to people about this, these tend to be the ones I typically see. Attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs are often things that people feel that they want to work on. And actually, that's very manageable. That's something that can be done through training, through building relationships, and so forth. Shall we move on then, please? Okay. Okay, so what can we do about this? We need to, first and foremost, I'm sure every one of you, because you're working in systems of care, will say, yes, so of course we do these things. But the first is, it's important to remind ourselves. We really have to recognize that regardless of their situation, regardless of their background, what resources they have, what their educational level is, families really do want their children to do well. Even families that are not particularly healthy, where the environment isn't particularly supportive for children, they still want the kids to do well. They may not have the capacities. This is where that capacities versus conditions comes into play, to achieve what they want, but they do want their kids to do well. So it's a very important strength to remember. And if you're always reminding families, even those who are, particularly those who are having a bit of a struggle, that you believe that they want their children to do well, you know that they want their children to do well, you're going to really, really, really do a lot to build a sense of confidence in that those families have, and a bit of trust with you, particularly if you mean it sincerely. The second is that we really need to design programs so that they support the family's efforts to help the children. So, for example, if we're always telling parents what they need to do without ever asking them, what help do you need in order to accomplish this, they're going to immediately experience frustration or failure, and so are we as professionals in systems of care. So always asking families, what can we do that will help you do this, whatever it is, whether it's reading to your children for half an hour a week, or checking off their homework, or using a certain behavioral skills chart, or following through on medication, always asking them what they need for support. And then, of course, developing staff capacity is very, very important. We have got to realize that for, umpteen years, professional systems have not focused highly on teaching staff in pre-service training at all to work with families in this kind of collaborative, shared manner that's essential for the involvement and engagement we're talking about here. And so we really need to focus on helping staff to see the strength in this, their own strength and their own capacity to do this. And that's a big staff development, in-service staff development, and it's ongoing. It's not just a question of telling people. They've got to have a chance to learn, develop the skills and practice them and have them reinforced, and then have opportunities to discuss with their peers, other staff, about what's working, what's not working, what they've tried, where they've had success, what frustrations they've had, so that they can begin to really move forward with and develop their own skills. Again, this is a capacities issue. Another is capitalize on the cultural strengths of the families in their communities. And these, in some senses, are the conditions. Those cultural strengths of the family and their community are conditions into which all this happens. If families are in a community, living in a community that has a high value on family engagement and gives families lots of support to do that, even families who have historically not done a whole lot in that area, they will sort of get caught up into those patterns of behavior. So really using what's there. And in some cases, that means reaching into the community, getting to know community leaders, even if they're not community leaders with experience of emotional and behavior disorders or children with special needs. But they are experienced with families in their community, and they do know the community culture. And the families that Systems of Care are working with are members of their community, so they are interested. Another is to build family social and political capital or connections. The fact that people don't feel alone any longer is one of the strongest and best things about Systems of Care, and especially about peer-to-peer family work and families being linked with family organizations. And that's one of the things Systems of Care does extremely well. So can we move on to the next slide? I probably don't need to tell you this, but it's really, really important to always remind yourself anyway, and that is one strategy does not fit all families, just like one-size jeans doesn't fit everybody. Some families have a greater or less capacity for handling written material. Some prefer face-to-face communication. Some need more intensive engagement than others. Some like to come to meetings, some don't. You really can't use one strategy and expect to get everybody involved. And that brings us to the three-tier model, and that's why we have the three-tier model. So could we move on to the next slide? The three-tier model it's built on a model you're already familiar with, and that is the three-tier model for public health, where we talk about universal strategies. Excuse me, universal strategies, selective strategies, and targeted strategies, or intensive strategies. For example, if we were to talk about fluoride for dental health and healthy teeth for children, a universal strategy is putting fluoride in the water. A selective strategy would be encouraging people to buy toothpaste that has fluoride in it. And intensive strategy would be for prescribing fluoride tablets for children to take as a vitamin supplement, a mineral vitamin supplement in their diet. And those would be three different ways of approaching that. You would have to, as a physician, you'd have to know what was the water quality in your community. You'd have to know something about the availability of all of these different options for a family before making a choice or discussing them with the family about what they would prefer to do. Okay, so the universal strategies are those that are afforded to all families in your system of care. Can we go to the next slide, which gives some examples? These are only some examples. I would encourage you, as I list these, to think of others in your community, things that you do in your community that are universal strategies for all families. This doesn't mean that all families come, but it's things that you design with the expectation and the hope that all families would participate in these. For example, you create a welcoming environment, and you solicit family input. You provide orientations. You establish basic communication systems. They may be newsletters. They may be some sort of bulletin boards. They may be various electronic things that folks do nowadays with broadcast emails or things that I don't know how to do, like Twitter, but things of those kinds, Facebook, things like that. And then sponsoring social activities. These are some sort of general, universal activities for families to participate in systems of care. And I would ask you, if you've thought for a minute about your own system of care, to identify, again, using the Q&A box, some of the universal strategies that you are using in your system of care that are working, that are encouraging families to come. Again, not a universal strategy means it's designed for everybody, but it doesn't necessarily mean that 100% of the people participate. It's the strategy that's universal, not the people. Okay? So you can type those in as I move on quickly to the next slide. At the second tier, in systems of care here, we're looking for identifying some additional supports that some families need a boost. This is equivalent to sort of a special toothpaste. And here, if we could go on to the next slide, please. Some examples would be connecting families with each other, buddying families up, getting a more experienced family member to reach out and connect with a new family member. Sometimes your lead family contact does this. Sometimes it's a family partner on a wraparound team. Sometimes it's a family liaison. Communities have their own terms for family members who do this and their own particular strategies for how they do it. Sometimes it's done through a family organization. Sometimes it's done through a system of care employee, various things of that kind. Offering families education and training, inviting people to a session that is specifically designed for a group that families that you've identified as having a particular special quality that would attract them or that they need some boosting in. For example, it might be offering English as a second language classes, which system of care that I visited a few years ago in Missouri actually did. And they offered these in a community center and with the collaboration of a local clergy. And a lot of families who had not participated and were very skeptical even about their children being involved in the system of care, created a great link to both boost their skills and also build a relationship. Translating materials into the languages families speak is another good example of a second-tier strategy. Soliciting family input, you'll see that's pretty much a universal at every strategy, every level of the tier, all three tiers. You've always got to be asking families. Particularly, you held an event, maybe a third of your families came, or that you would hope would come came. So you might want to get in touch with some of those who didn't come and say, look, we had this. We know that not everybody could come. We're curious to know, why you were not able to come, and what would be another way we could get this information to you, and how, what are the barriers that have to be overcome. And if you find out from half a dozen people or a dozen people that they have a similar barrier or a similar reason for not coming, that gives you some clues as to what kinds of strategies you need to develop for a second tier, because that's a cluster of families that have a common need that you can address with a concrete activity. Serving family members to serve on advisory groups is also a second-tier strategy, because here you're asking families to do something that's selective. Not every family member is going to serve on an advisory group, nor are there so many opportunities. But at the same time, recruiting family members to serve on advisory groups is important. And you want to make sure that you're not only recruiting from the families that always come to your universal strategies. You want to be able to recruit people from who are not typically coming, because they also have a great deal to contribute to the discussions about the system of care. And again, there's a lot more that you can contribute from your own community. I'd like to give you a chance for a second now to take another poll, as is a quickie, yes or no. Have you tried Tier 2 strategies in your program? Well, the polling seems to have stopped, and I see that we have 27 attendees, 4 or 5 of which are myself and some of the supporting staff for this webinar. So let's say that we probably Assuming there are 20 of participants on this call, 16 have responded, I would say we have a very high level of usage of Tier 2 strategies. Could we go on to the next slide, please? Okay. When we get up to Tier 3, where we're making special efforts for a few families, the ones who, even after we've tried a variety of second-tier strategies, we still haven't reached everybody. Some people have not participated, and this is an area where one-on-one attention is called for. Can we go on to the next slide, please? These are the kinds of things that systems of care do particularly well, because systems of care are all about one family at a time, one child or youth at a time, in a very focused, individualized way. I mean, systems of care are totally individualized. So we're very good at this in terms of planning interventions for children, planning services for children and their families, but we need to be more using the same approaches in engaging families in the broader system of care work as well. And so here we might need to tailor approaches to individual families. In some cases, it even involves getting down to repairing relationships between the child or student and their family, or between the family and the care workers or the system itself, their overall attitudes and beliefs and fears about the systems. One-on-one family liaisons or family partners or lead family contacts are really the best vehicle for doing this. But there are other strategies as well. Sometimes this can be done through a personal email or a personal phone conversation or a personal meeting sometime in the community. I'm sure, again, many of you can come up with additional strategies as well. Quick poll on this one. Yes or no, have you used Tier 3 strategies in your program? Okay. Well, it looks like we've got a little bit less use, a little bit more differentiation here, which doesn't surprise me either. So I think that's fine. Let's go on. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, you were emailed in advance a Word file that is a planning guide for a 3-tier approach to family engagement. It's a planning template. And while I go through this slide, I would encourage you to pull it out so that you can follow along as we get to the last part of this webinar. When you're doing a strategy, or you're applying this 3-tier strategy, the most important thing you need to understand right at the beginning is that you've got to do this in a planful way. And it is not a one-time thing. Every time you have an activity or every time you have an event or something you want to engage families in, pull out your 3-tier guide and use it. Again, use it as like a teacher would use a lesson planning format. The first question you need to ask yourself is, and as a group, what do you want family members to know or do as a result of the activity? We often ask parents to come and they don't know why they're coming. And you know what? We're not always sure why we're asking them either. We're coming because somebody said we have to have family involvement. That is not a good reason. And we've got to be more specific about we have to know why we want families to be involved, what we want them to know or do that is different, or maybe just an expansion of what they already know how to do as a result of the activity we invite them to participate in. The second is, what are the different groups of families we're trying to reach? Most systems of care have a diverse population of families that you're serving. So understanding the different populations and how to approach them differently and what kinds of challenges and strengths each brings to the communication and the activity is important to know as well. And the third is to figure out in advance how are we going to get this information or these skills to each of these different groups. What are we going to do for all the families? What are we going to do to give some a boost? And how are we going to connect with those that are isolated? So that is what the 3-tier planning guide helps us do. So if you would go to the planning guide now, please, the first page. Great. Okay. If you have your planning guide in front of you, as I go through, I'm going to give an example of an activity that a system of care might want to do and how they might use this planning guide to help them structure that activity to get maximum family engagement in that activity. While I'm going through that, you might want to take out your own copy of this template and fill it in for an activity of your own choosing, something that you're working on now in your community or you're going to be working on really soon or that you'd like to do, and try it out for yourself as we go along. So with that, and I have to say I want to thank Marie Nerhaus, our host for this event, for suggesting this particular topic. The topic is, and the name of the activity is, what does evaluation have to do with me and my family? Now, you could also have said, what does social marketing have to do with me and my family? Or what does governance have to do with me and my family? Or what does individual planning have to do with me and my family? You could put, pretty much anything else in there. But evaluation is certainly something that systems of care are engaged in, and it's certainly something that the funder, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, Child, Adolescent, and Family Branch, does expect families to participate in. And it's also an area that sometimes family organizations have a little difficulty figuring out how to bring new families into evaluation when families don't have experience with it. So it's a good topic. So in the first line, I would have typed in, what does evaluation have to do with me and my family? That's the topic. That's how we're going to advertise it, how we'll get parents interested. You might want to come up with something a little bit more catchy in your own community, using words that your own family, organizations, or your own cultures respond to. Under the purposes, the second line, the purpose or objective of the activity, you'd see there I've written underneath it that this should be a concise sentence that tells a single, only one, most important reason for holding the activity or event. Remember on the previous slide I indicated that knowing what you wanted families to be able to do, why you were holding the activity was very, very important. And this is where you clarify it for yourself right up front. And the purpose here that I've identified is to acquaint families with all the opportunities to participate in the evaluation of our system of care and encourage them to participate. Now, that's my own example. You might phrase that differently. You might want to only use part of that. You might come up with some different reasons. But that's the purpose I'm using here. So we're going to have the event is, what does evaluation have to do with me and my family? The purpose or objective is to acquaint families with the opportunity to participate in the evaluation of our systems of care and encourage them to do so. Now we get to the outcomes. These are the things, a short list, not a long list, not every possible thing families could do, but the ones that are most important. And I would suggest you put them in priority order as well. So if you come up with 15 or 20, you've got to narrow it down to 4 or 5, and prioritizing them will help. But these are the things you want families to really be able to do as a result of this experience. My list here, and I've got 4 examples. I could have come up with a lot more, but I'm encouraging you to come up with a short list, so I prioritized. Families will understand why evaluation is an important component of systems of care. They'll understand why it's important. The second is they'll realize that the evaluation team genuinely values what their experience is and wants their perspective. They will realize that they are valued. Important words for families to achieve. The third one is that families will be introduced to the various roles they could play in the evaluation process. New thoughts for families for sure. The roles that they could possibly play. And then families will have the opportunity to declare which of these activities, if any, they're most interested in taking part. So we'll be giving them information. We will be enhancing their understanding of things that they can do and giving them a choice about doing something. Those 3 things, typically information, opportunities, and something they can do, are usually very important to have in any part of any event, because it leaves people with a sense of, I've learned something, I've been given some information and choices, and I've been able to do something. They feel empowered by having that. Let's move on to the next page, please. Here we get into how we would address these goals within the 3 tiers. So the first question is, how will the outcomes be achieved? Remembering again that the outcomes had to do with information for families, opportunities for them, and making choices. If for tier 1, I have reported on my notes the strategy, how the outcome will be achieved, is our evaluation team and our lead family contact, again, Reason for that being to show the collaboration, to show the communication, the shared responsibility, the shared discussion. They'll make a brief presentation and a simple presentation to a group of families, and it will include the following things. Again, you only have a short time that you're going to be with families in this activity, so you need to make sure you're focused on the things that are most important. They don't need to know the whole history of the system of care, but they do need to know what the evaluation is used for. For example, continuous quality improvement, national reporting and accountability, and certainly for community education. And to the extent that it's used where information from the evaluations can be plowed back into individual student planning, that should be student and child youth planning should also be included. A second one that I've put down is why family voice, and I would put that in quotations, is important in the evaluation. It's not just that we want families to be present. We want them to be active. We want to be able to have them say what they think when we ask them a question like, do you think this particular instrument would be something families in our community would understand? And we need to really create an environment where families can use their voice. So that's important at this initial session to create, give families help them believe by our own behavior as we present this that we really do care what they say. The third one is that the various roles for families in our evaluation will be described, and we will also include a brief list of what the expectations are for each of these and what opportunities each affords for families. For example, we might want to be recruiting families to interview other families as part of one of our instruments that we're collecting. So we want to be able to tell people not just that you can participate in this, but what does that mean? How much training will be involved? Who else will you be working with? I would assume probably some dyad with a professional researcher or someone with research training. How many times will you be doing it? How much time will each event take? Will there be any compensation? And then, what will I be learning? What's in it for me as a family member? Well, I'll be gaining some new skills. I'll have an opportunity to meet new people. I'll be able to contribute back to a community and a program that's been helpful to me and my family, various things like that. And then the last thing I have down, the fourth one, is inviting families to sign up for the evaluation activities that they'd like to participate in. I made an extra note here, and that is this, and that I would like to, if I was planning this activity, to either prepare a separate video or video the presentation so that it could be posted on our System of Care website for people to review, to refresh their experience, for others who didn't participate to view afterwards. So that's an example of a Tier 1, how the outcomes would be achieved. I'm moving down instead of moving down immediately through the chart, let's go across to Tier 2. To Tier 1, it's a group activity that everybody would be invited to, and having just said that, I'm going to renege on myself and say let's go down to where the event will be held, which would be the second row of Tier 1. And my example is it would be an evening meeting held at our System of Care main office meeting room, which is a good-sized auditorium that could hold plenty of people. And that we would invite everybody who was enrolled, as well as all the family organizations in the community to come. If we're going to now moving across to the second tier and going to how the outcomes will be achieved. In this case, we're going to meet with families in smaller groups. That's the primary vehicle. Individual members of the evaluation team and the lead family contact or another family partner will present the same material but in a more intimate setting somewhere in the community to a small group of families. We'll involve trusted community leaders associated with that venue to help recruit families to come. And we would also present in the family's language, if it's a different language. That presentation would be exclusively in Hmong, if that's what the language is for that community. Again, this requires building partnerships with people in the community who can help you with all of this. And then a copy of the video will be left with the venue, again, so that they can review it with families as a refresher or they can show it to other people. At the third tier, the outcome will be achieved by sharing information with individual families. And in this case, I envision an individual care coordinator or a member of the evaluation team, along with a lead family contact or another family partner, would present the same material to families in a one-on-one situation, possibly by viewing the video and discussing it. Going down to the second level again, where will the event be held? Remember, in Tier 1, I said it would be an evening meeting at our System of Care main office meeting room. For Tier 2, I would set up a series of small group meetings in the community. Again, going back to the concept that you need to be looking at which pockets of families and which parts of the community, are going to be the best places to go to bring more people involved, to get more people involved. So, for example, I might hold a meeting in the Latin Community Center in the late afternoon for families who are picking their kids up after cultural or recreational activities. Or I might hold it in a church hall on a Saturday morning. Or I might hold it in an evening at a recreation center in our local housing project. Again, these would be choices you would make with families, with community leaders, in order to reach families specifically on what what you've learned from who came and who didn't come, would be the best choices. In the case of Tier 3, the venue is a place of the family's choosing. It could be their home, it could be our offices, it could be someplace else, and it could even be a conference call if that's really what the family prefers. The third line gets to the next line is who is the intended audience for this event. Remember, for Tier 1, we were going to invite everybody. For Tier 2, we're going to be selective and invite families who did not come to the open house, but we're going to make efforts to organize them into smaller groups that have a similar communication need or preference. And, for example, if I was holding one in the Latin American Youth Center, it might be for families who only speak Spanish. For families who are working at night, I might use either a local church on a Saturday, for example. And for families who live in a specific area that may be a little bit more remote, maybe not so safe to go out at night, I might hold that one in their housing project. In the case of the
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know we have 10 minutes left.
Thank you very much. We're going to make it just fine. Okay. I would just say if any of you have questions as I'm going through this, or you have ideas you want to share, again, go to the Q&A box and type it in. We have people monitoring those, and we will be able to have a few of those asked at the end, I hope. And if not, we'll try to get to them offline afterwards. In the case of Tier 3, the intended audience are those who didn't come to either the Tier 1 or Tier 2 strategy events. Materials, these are important. What are we going to give people that they can take away? For this particular event, what does evaluation mean to me and my family? I would want a simple one-page graphic that illustrates the different components of the evaluation and their relationship to each other. That doesn't have to be every aspect of the evaluation, but those that are most important to convey to families during this particular event. The second is a list of the roles that families could play in the evaluation and a brief description of what each involves and what the expectations are. Again, this would be a paper handout of something that was delivered in the presentation, but that they could take home with them. The third would be a sign-up form, and encourage them to, as many as possible, to fill it out before they leave. For those that didn't, something they could take home. It has their return information. They could, some way that it could be returned. By the way, I'd also post that sign-up form on our website. And then the last thing I would make sure to give them, again, in some concrete form is the website where additional information could be gotten and where the video could be viewed. For Tier 2 and Tier 3, I'd use exactly the same materials, the difference being that I might translate them into specific languages as necessary. Special accommodations. For Tier 1, typical accommodations are child care and transportation and refreshments. You might have something in your community that requires some additional accommodation besides that. Make sure that you know what those are and that you do them. For the Tier 2, you might really need to make a special effort to have simultaneous translation or have the entire event presented only in the local language. For Tier 3, typically you don't worry about special accommodations because the whole thing is entirely individualized. Now, the last one is really important. What, if any, special accommodations will be provided? And how you know when the outcomes have been achieved is not on this form. And I think this is a really important one for you to think about, and I would encourage you to use the space at the bottom to type in or write in this question. How will you know if and when the outcomes have been achieved? For me, and this would be universal across all three strategies, there are three things that I think came to mind quickly. One is that families will be asked to complete an evaluation before they leave the meeting, whichever meetings they come to, whether it's the large meeting at our office or a local meeting in the community. The second is that a few weeks after the event, or maybe a month or so, you'd have to decide what worked best in your own community. A sample of families who participated would get a phone call, and they'd be asked some questions about the event. The most important being, do they remember having gone, and what stood out for them? But beyond that is what have they done themselves as follow-up? And if they say they haven't done anything, then you might ask them, well, why didn't you? Was it because you didn't think it was for you? You needed something else? There wasn't enough information? You can really mine that for very, very valuable information about what's going to help you do a better job of connecting families to engage them in your evaluation process. And lastly, the number of families that sign up would have to be tracked on a continuous basis so that you would know how many families are actually signing up for these different activities and opportunities, and are they, in fact, persisting in their engagement. And I would say, in addition, particularly for families who drop out of the process, very important to ask them why, so that you know and can accommodate those issues or those needs in future planning. Could we quickly move to the next slide? This is so important. Systems don't change. It's people who change systems. I cannot encourage you enough to think personally, yourself. What can you do differently tomorrow or next week, even a small thing, that might begin to change the way you engage with families, and or if you're family members, the way you engage with systems. Very important. Make a little commitment to yourself. Type yourself a little note, stick it someplace where you look at it once a day or every other day and ask yourself, am I making a difference? Am I changing systems? What am I doing to change the system? And the last slide, please. And the ultimate question, of course, is, if this was my child in my situation, would I really feel that the system of care staff believed that I was doing all I could to help my child be safe and successful? And if I'm a family member, would I feel that the system of care staff believed that if I was a family member, would I also feel that what I was doing was encouraging the system of care staff to actually know that I'm doing things to make my child safe and participate. So it's two sides. It's a two-sided question. It's only one sentence, but it's two-sided. That ends my formal presentation. That leaves us a little time for some comment or questions, and I will turn this over now to the moderators.
Hi, Trina. We've got a question. A gentleman says that you mentioned 3 questions or frameworks when you were talking about when you're writing the points on each of the tiers, and we just wanted to reiterate those 3 questions.
Oh, okay. In terms of completing, this has to do with what the outcomes of the event or activity should be. So it's on the first page of the template. It's the 3rd row. And the 3 things that I identified were you need to convey some information to families. So some of your time needs to be devoted to information. The second is that you need to be giving them some opportunity to make a choice. Some information. For example, in my example, it was the different roles that they could play. So they learn about what opportunities are available for them, and that's that they could then decide enough information about those opportunities so they could decide which ones are right for them. And the third thing is for families to have something to do. In this case, it was to declare their interest in being part of the evaluation process. Let me give you an example from a different activity that might help as well. Let's say we were talking about helping families to engage with their children, following through with their children, let's say on homework. The information part of the presentation would be, why is it important for kids to do homework? What's the benefit of doing homework? The second, that would be the information part. The second part would be, what are the options that families have? This would be a list of different ways that families can support kids in doing homework. It might include making sure they have a quiet space to do it. It might include ways to reinforce them if they've done it well, as opposed to punishing them if they haven't. Ways of providing incentives for doing it as opposed to disincentives. Another might be ways that they could check homework. Another might be how they could check our school website for what homework assignments are. That's not universal in every school, but I know around here you can. Where I live, you can. So those would be sort of options things that families could do. And the third would be for them to actually make a choice. In this case, I might, at this very meeting, give families a little form and ask them to say, this is what I'm going to help my child do with homework by, and make a little sort of personal pledge that they take home with them. Those would be examples of information, options, and a commitment and an action. And no matter how many items you have or what the topic is, if you have all three of those in your event or your activity, you're really giving families what they need. Something I need to know, what I need to know, what I can do, and then an opportunity to make my own choice. Does that answer? I hope that answers the question, and I see we're getting very close to the end of my clock. That was a good question. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to quickly submit through the Q&A box? Okay, so that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much, Trina and Marie, for presenting and for putting this together. If anyone has any questions about the webinar, or if you would like to, maybe if you think of a question later that you'd like to ask, you're more than welcome to email me, and I will definitely do my best to be in touch with Trina and Marie to address the questions. My email address is kmcdermott@air.org, and I think all of you have received some emails from me. But if anyone, unless anyone else has any questions, thanks for coming, and we'll talk to you soon.